Hola amigos, bien o no, y saludos desde Medellín. Hoy el tema es cómo puede mejorar o desarrollar nuestra voz de micrófono, or should we say our microphone voice, how we can improve our microphone voice. So when I say our microphone voice, I mean the voice we use when we know we're being listened to. So it's a bit different from when we're just talking relaxed with our friends or our family, but when we're using our voice at work, on the telephone, or perhaps even if we were using a microphone of some sort, the fact that we're conscious that people are listening to us. So whether we're doing a presentation or say we're doing a lot of work on the telephone, that becomes our microphone voice. It's the voice we use in perhaps more formal circumstances or when we're working, something where we need to communicate our idea very clearly. How do we practice that? This is something to think about because particularly we're trying to improve in what is now our second language, but this actually holds true for native speakers as well. This is something you have to practice so you get a sense of how you sound. So some of this draws on things we talked about in other videos. This is about being conscious of how you sound, practicing reading aloud so you can hear it and go, okay, that's what I sound like. Maybe recording how you sound as well. And it's to get a sense that, okay, now I'm happy with my voice, but I want to check that when I do use it to speak, it's clear. So one of the key ones with this is the tempo, the timing you use. Because clearly when you're speaking perhaps in a more relaxed way, you might find you speak a bit faster. So a lot of your words are more kind of run together, they're perhaps not so clear. So we need often to go a bit slower so that we can sound the words more clearly, and we can use pauses more obviously to stress particular words so that our audience can hear us more clearly and understand what we're trying to say. So part of what I was talking about yesterday, when we look at how we're going to project our voice, this helps us to practice this because this makes us conscious of how we're developing the sound. But another way to do this is to take something you're familiar with reading and read it many times out loud, and then you can start to see where your neutral kind of tone and rhythm of speech is, because it might be different for each of us. Some, particularly depending on what language you've come from, and now you're going to try and do this in English, because each language has its own kind of innate tempo, which might be a bit different. I know a lot of my students, I say, no, you can speak slower, go slower. Go slower, it's clearer. And they're like, but I thought I was going really slow. I said, no, you can go slower than that. So there is certainly a difference between Spanish and English, and whichever language you're coming to English from, I'm sure you might notice another difference. But the idea then is to find something you're familiar with, get comfortable with reading that text, but read it many times out loud so you get to hear, okay, where am I kind of following this? What feels for me a comfortable reading aloud speed that I can say the words clearly? And then start thinking about that, because that's going to start showing what really is your kind of like metronome, your inset tempo of how fast you speak. And within that tempo, that's where you start bringing in the general modulation, where you're using your voice to emphasize particular words. And maybe then you can bring an occasional pause more for emphasis. So I'm going to show you what I mean. I'm going to go back and read you this piece from well, I can use this pretty much as one of my test pieces. This is a reading I did before. It's Pericles' funeral oration. Now you don't have to pick anything as classical as this really, anything you like, but I'm going to read this one again now because I did a video on this a few months ago. I'll share the link in the description. You can see and compare like how I did it then, the whole thing. I'm just going to read part of this paragraph. And I'm going to try and illustrate the difference between, okay, this is what I think is my normal microphone voice, if you like, and how I could have developed it from different directions. It was a bit too fast, a bit too slow. Yeah. So let's have a look. This is from page 145. Let me say that our system of government does not copy the institutions of our neighbours. It is more the case of our being a model to others than of imitating anyone else. Our constitution is called a democracy because power is in the hands not of a minority but of the whole people. Now, when I read that like that, I would say to you that that's an example of my microphone voice. That's my normal tempo when I'm doing this kind of reading aloud. And this is the tempo I try to keep to when I'm talking to my students, because hopefully that's very clear. But let me show you different ways you could read this, and then you'll see what I mean about when you have to kind of get a sense of where your microphone voice is. So I could read this a bit quicker. Let me say that our system of government does not copy the institutions of our neighbours. It is more the case of our being a model to others than of our imitating anyone else. Our constitution is called a democracy because power is in the hands not of a minority but of the whole people. Ooh, okay, so I said all the words, but it was a bit quick, and that might be a bit tricky to follow, particularly if I'm reading a whole page of that. That's very, very fast. Probably not the easiest thing to listen to. But if I go too slow, let me say that our system of government does not copy the institutions of our neighbours. It is more the case of our being a model to others than of our imitating anyone else. Our constitution is called a democracy because power is in the hands not of a minority but of the whole people. Well, 2 pages of that and I think most of us will have fallen asleep. So you can see the extremes of this, but you can try and vary this yourself. You have the standard text that you like to read. You'll get a feel of where you can do this, where do you feel comfortable. When you're at a comfortable point, then you can start to think, okay, well, I can look at more expression within that page. But with practice, you can take that normal tempo into most of those kind of speeches you normally have to make. So any kind of presentation, you know, once you've read it maybe once or twice, you'll feel it. You'll get back to your normal microphone voice. Now, if you are working perhaps on the telephone a lot in your job, usually you have some kind of scripted response for the first maybe 10 seconds, 20 seconds when you answer the phone or when you talk to your client, who if you're ringing them to speak to them. It's usually some kind of introduction of who you are or who the company is and how can I help, or I'm calling you about. So if you have a set of fairly standard sentences like that, which won't take long to read, I mean, we'd look in, say, 10, 20 seconds, thereabouts. Again, you can practice that multiple times, and eventually you will find a nice, clear tempo that works, like we say, like a metronome, that for you fits your voice very well. You can say all the words nice and clearly, and that becomes your microphone voice. That's the tempo you can use across any script you get. So that's the thing to practice. Think about that. So with that, you can pick any text at all. I'll turn to another page in the book. Let's try this. Hold on. This is something from the introduction. We shall never know what was going on in Thucydides' mind in those final years, what it was that drove him back to the earlier years at the cost of a complete neglect of the ending. It is necessary to make some sort of reasonable guess, however, in order to get at his thinking in general. And there we go. So that's not a piece I usually read, but I hope you can see I'm able to go back to my normal microphone voice because I practice it a lot. So think about that. Find yourself a text that you're happy reading and you're confident with. Use that as a benchmark to test your reading against. Try different speeds to see which one you feel most comfortable with. And remember, you're aiming for clarity. Now this might be you need to think about, okay, if I'm going to project the voice a bit further, that's a nice way to help you because that will get you to slow down a little bit. But really, once you get that pace and tempo set, you know that literally next time you're on the telephone or you're on the mic, straight away, that's the voice you're going to use. And if you're well practiced at that, you can do this, literally you can turn away from conversations you're having in a more social or casual setting, and as soon as you pick up the phone, you can put back on the voice to do that. So there we are. That's the thought for today. Déjame saber en los comentarios, como siempre. I hope you find this one useful. But for now, from Medellin, where it's raining, we'll say cheerio.